Welcome to the Encountering Ramana Maharshi series. You are drawn to listen to this series through the grace of Bhagavan Ramana, who is none other than your true self. The following stories and reflections of devotees, all of them direct disciples who sat in the physical presence of the Master, are taken from three primary sources: the Mountain Path Quarterly Magazine, the Ramana Puriya Puranam, and Face to Face with Sri Ramana. You can easily access these stories for free online. I claim no copyright. This series is purely the expression of Guru's grace. Each of us has fallen into Ramana's orb through unique circumstances and journeys. For those coming to Bhagavan Ramana for the first time, all I can say is, great good fortune has touched you. Ramana shared everything without a word. Those that did not have the ability to fully assimilate his silent presence or receive his wordless blessing often felt the need to ask questions. Doubt, it is said, is the last thing to go. Ramana would advise them to look inward using a tool called self-inquiry. Self-inquiry roots out the latent tendencies of mind which pull one from the natural state of peace. The being that was later known as Bhagavan Shri Ramana Maharshi was born in the south of India on the 5th of January 1879. An ordinary life transpired until age 17, when in 1896 a great event took place wherein he realized the deathless nature of his true self. Leaving home a short time later, Ramana was led to the holy mountain Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai, India. Ramana settled there completely lost in the bliss of being without body identification, spending the next 10 years in temples and caves while emanating an all-pervasive silence. Even to sit near him or to receive a short glance was enough to catapult seekers into a state of bliss. The principal book describing his teachings is Talks with Ramana on Abiding Peace and Happiness, gathered in the years 1935 through 1939. I found the book strangely compelling when I first discovered it. I would read a few pages, then fall into a trance or nap, and upon waking be unable to comment on what I'd read or even remember specific words or phrases. Yet I found myself drawn over and over to those pages, while taking in the basics of self-inquiry and slowly assimilating what is meant by immersion in silence. C.R. Rajamani, associated with the printing business in Madras, India, first visited Ramana in the early 1940s. He told this story in 1998 during a talk in New York. I have been a devotee of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi for over 55 years. I was in my early 20s when I first had his darshan. The event is still fresh in my memory, not because I was at that age so mature, which I was not, but because of a very remarkable incident I saw on that occasion. I went to Ramana Ashrama in the early 40s, when the Second World War was at its peak, and our own independence movement was also at its maximum intensity. I am not certain about the date or month of my visit. It may have been December or January. I remember the season was quite cool. The summit of the holy mountain Arunachala was shrouded in dense mist and clouds. The morning air was crisp and pleasant. The Maharshi was seated on a couch. A cast iron charcoal brazier was radiating a comfortable warmth, and a pleasing aroma of the incense thrown into it at regular intervals was pervading the entire hall. About 30 people were seated on the floor facing the Maharshi. None spoke or even whispered. What struck me was that no one seemed to show even an inclination to talk. Some were meditating with closed eyes. Sri Ramana's body was luminous like burnished gold. He was clad in his usual kapanan, with a small towel across his chest. He appeared to be occasionally dozing off and had to steady his head often. He frequently stretched his palms over the fire and massaged his long fingers. In spite of his apparent dozing, his eyes did not look drowsy. On the contrary, they were extraordinarily bright and alert. He was not looking at anybody in particular. I felt I was in the presence of an extremely affable person with a lot of natural grace, at perfect ease and without any pretension whatsoever. I saw a white-skinned boy of about 10 years of age sitting a couple of feet to my left. Next to him was a white man, presumably his father. Further to my left was a white woman, whom I thought was the boy's mother. I then saw Bhagavan's eyes alight on the boy for a few moments. I thought it was just a casual look. The boy was all the time looking at Bhagavan with a sort of fixation, as if on the verge of asking a question. But no, he broke into tears. A cascade of tears came gushing out of his eyes. They were not tears of pain, for his face was radiant with joy. I could see that Shri Bhagavan's glance, though only resting on him for a brief moment, had opened in the boy's heart a veritable reservoir of pure joy. I learned that the boy had come, along with his parents, who had come to attend the nearby Theosophical Society convention. The boy's parents arranged a trip to Tiruvannamalai, but he stoutly refused. However, the boy changed his mind at the last moment and did make the trip. Within an hour of his face-to-face meeting with Shri Bhagavan, his mental barriers were reduced to nothingness. He shed tears for quite some time, and later said to his mother, "I am so happy. I don't want to leave his presence. I want to be always with him." His mother was most upset. She pleaded with Bhagavan, "Swami, please release my son. He is our only child. We will be miserable without him." Bhagavan smiled at her and said, "Release him? I am not keeping him tied up. He is a mature soul. A mere spark has ignited his spiritual fire." Turning to the boy, the Maharshi said, "Go with your parents. I will always be with you." He spoke in Tamil throughout, but the boy understood him fully. He bowed to Bhagavan and reluctantly left with his parents. Whenever I recall this incident, it creates a feeling of being very near to something truly divine. Of course, I have had my own share of Shri Bhagavan's grace in my later years. I have also had some ever-fresh visions, which I dare not devalue as creations of a fevered imagination, for they have strengthened my faith in Bhagavan. Some of them occurred decades after Shri Bhagavan's Mahanirvana. They have been firm confirmations of his continued presence and reassurances of his immortal words, which he said, "They say I am going. Where can I go? I am always here." F. H. Humphreys, originally from England, came to India in January 1911 to join the police department as an assistant superintendent. He is considered the first Westerner to encounter Ramana. His deep-seated spiritual inclination resulted in his meeting Ganapati Muni, a devotee of Ramana. The following account is from his letters to a friend in England. "Yesterday I got a day's leave and went to the Maharshi along with the Muni. At 2 p.m, we went up the hill. On reaching the cave, we sat at his feet and said nothing. I felt lifted out of myself. For half an hour I looked into the Maharshi's eyes, which never changed their expression of deep contemplation. I began to realize that his body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. I could only feel that the Maharshi's body was not the man. It was the instrument of God, merely a sitting, motionless corpse from which God was radiating terrifically. My own feelings were indescribable. The Muni said that I might speak. I asked for enlightenment and teaching. The Maharshi spoke a few sentences of broken English and in Telugu, which conveyed worlds of meaning. The most touching sight was the number of tiny children up to about 7 years of age who climbed the hill, all on their own, to come and sit near the Maharshi, even though he may not speak a word or even look at them for days. They do not play, but just sit there quietly in perfect contentment. The Maharshi is a man beyond description in his expression of dignity, gentleness, self-control, and calm strength of conviction. For his second visit, Humphreys was accompanied by an interpreter. In the words of the Englishman, "I went by motorcycle and climbed up to the cave. The sage smiled when he saw me, but was not in the least surprised. He asked me a private question, only known to him and me. Evidently, he recognized me the moment he saw me. Everyone who comes to him is an open book, and a single glance suffices to reveal to him its contents. 'You have not had your food,' he said, 'and are hungry.' I admitted that it was so. He immediately called a disciple to bring food, some rice, ghee, and fruit. It is eaten with the fingers, as Indians do not use spoons. Though I have practiced eating this way, I lack dexterity. So he gave me a coconut spoon to eat with, smiling and talking during the time I ate. You can imagine nothing more beautiful than his smile. When I finished, I was still hungry, and he knew it, and ordered more. He knows everything, and when others pressed me to eat fruit when I'd had enough, he stopped them at once. Whilst I was eating, he was relating my past history to others, and accurately too. Yet he had seen me but once before, and many hundreds in between, no doubt. He simply turned, as it were, on clairvoyance. Later on I was thirsty, for it had been a hot ride. But I would not show it, come what may. Yet he knew, and told a disciple to bring some lemonade. I sat for about 3 hours, listening to his teachings. It is strange what a change it makes to have been in his presence. Pascaline Millet, a French writer and seeker, whose book Turn Eastwards detailed her 9-month pilgrimage to India in 1937, said of her first impression of Ramana, "In the ashram we saw at one end of the hall a silent, motionless figure reclining on a couch, lost in deep meditation, oblivious, it would seem, of everybody and everything. We slipped in quietly and seated ourselves on the ground amongst the crowd. I took in slowly the strange, unforgettable scene, my whole attention fixed on that central figure whose calm majesty, serene strength, and perfect poise seemed to fill the whole place with unutterable peace. To look into his eyes, shining like stars, was perhaps for the first time to know the meaning of eternity, and to be caught up in the bliss that passeth understanding. Who was this great one? On what rung of the ladder of human or superhuman evolution did he stand? Such questions have but little value. When the sun shines, does one need to know why and how it shines? I opened my heart to the spiritual life which radiated so intensely in the silence. I had the impression of being, as it were, surrounded by a sea of fiery power, welding all present into a great flame rising heavenwards. Not once did the silent figure turn or move or show any sign of interest in the proceedings, that is, the recitation of the Vedas conducted as evening prayers in the ashram. It was as if he had been living in a sphere beyond the limitations of time and space. Later, when we entered the pandal of the annual festival of the Maharshi's birthday, he was busy writing and reading. But somehow I had the feeling that all the while he lived in a state where time and space did not exist, in the region of the absolute, at the very heart of the universe. This can hardly be described, much less proved and only dimly sensed, but even so constituted a never-to-be-forgotten experience. His utter impersonality and supreme detachment did not in the least exclude all-embracing compassion, sympathy, and understanding of the many problems and difficulties which were continually being submitted to him by the weary, sorrow-stricken people who come to him in the hope of finding comfort and help. Undoubtedly, merely to live in his presence is the greatest help that one could possibly receive. It is a fact that no one who comes to the ashram goes away empty-handed. Each receives to his utmost capacity, be that capacity great or small, and many people got inner experiences which have changed their very lives. Later, a letter was received from Pascaline Millet that she wrote to Ramana 2 years later from Versailles, France. 2 years have come and gone since I crossed the threshold of thy ashram, and yet in spirit I have ever remained there. Though illusion still often veils the vision of reality revealed in the blessed silence of thy presence, though the silver thread of self-awareness be often lost amidst changing light and shadows, still the inner urge to realize the self remains and grows stronger and becomes more insistent as grace and search go hand in hand. At times, yet rare, with no apparent cause, spontaneous awareness of I springs up, and bliss fills the heart with glowing warmth. I pray to thee for light and guidance that I know are ever there, and at thy feet lay offerings of unchanging love. Elanor Pauline Nui, a middle-aged woman from California, visited Ramana for the first time in 1939. She says, in 1939, I was living in California with my twin sister and reached a crisis in my life. After years of anguish and sleepless nights, I was in a critical condition. When things seemed darkest, I had an unusual feeling that I should go away. I discussed it with my twin Betty and decided to take a trip around the world. After making the reservation, I became very ill and had to cancel it. One obstacle after another presented itself until it seemed as though I were not to go, and being so ill, I did not care if I went or not. Still, there always seemed to be something urging me to go, and my sister also felt that I should go. After a few weeks of rest, I felt better and made reservations on another ship that was to sail a month later. But when the time arrived for sailing, I was still not able to leave my bed. The boat sailed from San Francisco through the Panama Canal, reaching New Orleans a month later. The steamship agent suggested my going to New Orleans by train, which takes 3 days instead of 1 month, hoping I would feel better in the meantime. I had a very trying trip to New Orleans, and upon arriving I collapsed and was taken to a Christian Science practitioner's home, where they put me to bed and took care of me. They thought I was in no condition to take a long trip, but I felt as though I must. I could not turn back. Fortunately, the boat was 2 weeks late. Otherwise, it would not have been able to sail. The steamship agent said, "You do not look very well. If the captain sees you, I am afraid he will not take you, as we do not carry a physician on board." However, finally he agreed to my going and said, "Do not let the captain see you until you are out at sea." Though outward conditions were very dark, I went, knowing that God would take care of me. I felt as though I were led, and if I had not followed that inner voice which prompted me, I would never have had the blessed experience of finding the happiest part of my life in the presence of Bhagavan Shri Ramana. The doctor who vaccinated me before I left knew that I was not well. He said, "Why are you taking the trip?" I replied, "I want to find myself." I was seeking something I had not found, peace. Somehow my mind would always turn to India, especially during those days when I was in bed. We sailed from New Orleans to Cape Town, South Africa, a 3-week trip without a stop. Providence was with me again, for had the boat stopped, I believe I would have returned home. But God had other plans for me. I was torn between conflicting emotions and became worse again. My prayers seemed of no avail. I would have the most dreadful nightmares and wake up crying. I could not bear it any longer, so I sent a radiogram to the doctor. Need help in every way, especially at night. Cold, much worse, filled with fear. Will write from Cape Town. I don't know what I was afraid of, but my mind was never at peace. I felt better for a while, but found it necessary to send a second cable. Therefore, had the boat stopped on its way to Cape Town, I should have disembarked and returned home. But Providence has always the upper hand. When we reached Cape Town, I felt much better. But as I did not like that ship, I had disembarked at South Africa, where I spent 1 month waiting for another boat. As we approached India, I decided to get off at Madras instead of going on to Calcutta, where the ship would be in dry dock for 2 weeks. The people on board gave all sorts of reasons why I should not get off at Madras. It was very difficult to leave them. Nevertheless, I did. So they took me to the Connemara Hotel, saying it was not safe to stop at a second-rate hotel because of the food. After my friends had gone, I felt lost and went to my room and with tears in my eyes prayed for guidance. All night the heat was intense, so the next morning I asked the proprietor of the hotel if he could suggest a cooler place. He said the hill station Kodaikanal was lovely and cool. So I made my plans to leave Madras immediately. Motoring by car, I found it to be a charming place. The very first day I met 2 Hindu brothers, and I asked them if they knew any seers. I have no explanation to offer as to why I put that question. I anticipated nothing. They said they knew of one seer in Tiruvannamalai by the name Shri Ramana Maharshi. People come from far and near to see him. He left home when he was 17 years old and never went to school after that. He is the greatest seer in India. It is difficult to find one that is genuine. I decided to leave for Tiruvannamalai the next day. My friends helped me in every way, told me to buy some bedding and a few other things, but did not tell me that it was a custom to take a gift to the holy man. In fact, I knew nothing about life at an ashram. When I left Madras, I had no idea I would have this experience, but was eager to go and felt as though something momentous was about to happen. After arriving there at Tiruvannamalai, I engaged a bullock cart to take me to the ashram, where I was greeted by some of the devotees, including Nirajananda Swami, brother of Shri Bhagavan. They told me that Shri Bhagavan was on the hill, but would be in the hall shortly, and graciously invited me to have my breakfast. My heart throbbed with expectation as I was taken to the hall. As I entered it, I felt the atmosphere was filled with Shri Bhagavan's purity and blessedness. One feels a breath of the divine in the sage's presence. He was sitting on a couch, clad only in a loincloth, surrounded by his devotees. When he smiled, it was as though the gates of heaven were thrown open. I have never seen eyes more alight with divine illumination. They shine like stars. He greeted me very tenderly and made some inquiries about me, which put me at ease. His look of love and compassion was a benediction that went straight to my heart. After spending the morning with him, I had lunch at 11 o'clock and rested until 2 p.m. Then I returned to the hall. As I looked upon Shri Bhagavan's serene face and his eyes, which beamed with mercy, my soul was stirred. He knew how much I needed him, while he looked straight into my heart. Everyone who comes to him is blessed. The inner peace which is his is radiated to all. A beautiful sight are the little children kneeling before the Master as he blesses them and smiles so tenderly, sometimes taking one in his arms, reminding me of the painting, Christ Blessing the Children. Later I walked around the grounds, talked to the devotees. At 7 o'clock I had a light meal. Then I had the opportunity to say just a few words to Shri Bhagavan about my journey. Sometime later, I went to the traveler's bungalow, as ladies are not allowed to stay in the ashram at night. I would like to say here, one reason why I had been in such a rundown condition was that I had not slept well for years, although I had been taking medicine, which never gave me any relief. Although I said nothing to Shri Bhagavan about this, the amazing thing was that I slept soundly for the first night and thereafter without any medication, though I lacked the many comforts I had been accustomed to. I receive the medicine of all medicines, the unfailing grace of the Lord, whose name is heart. I rose the next morning feeling refreshed, as though I were born anew. Soon after, one afternoon, I was standing by the gate, and Shri Bhagavan stopped, while on his way to the hillside, and asked me if I had more peace. His loving solicitude made me feel quite at home, and when he smiled, my joy knew no bounds. During those sacred hours with the Master, I unconsciously absorbed the truth which he embodies. It filled all my being. My love blossomed into deep devotion, and I was filled with ineffable peace. The things which seemed so vital before no longer of any importance. I could see things in their correct perspective. The heartaches of yesterday and the thoughts of tomorrow faded into oblivion. Here in the ashram, far away from the noise and confusion of the busy highways, silence reigns. It is broken only by the bleating of the sheep and goats, and the songs of the birds, and the shepherd's song as he takes his flocks home to rest. Time seems to stand still in this peaceful sacred retreat, amidst the beauties of nature, with its lovely flower gardens and beautiful pools, which are surrounded by gnarled oak-like trees that greet you like old friends. It is so primitive, but then therein lies its charm. It is truly the Holy Land. The air is permeated with his peace and love. Looking upon eternal Arunachala, the hill of light, one is filled with awe and is overwhelmed by a great spiritual power. Everything is vibrant and speaks to us in silence. On full moon night, it is especially inspiring to go round the hill. In this deep silence and quietude, one readily hears the voice of God. In the inspiring words of the Master from the 5 hymns of Arunachala, only to convey by silence thy transcendent state, thou standest as a hill, shining from heaven to earth. One may also say with the psalmist, be still and know that I am God. These were among the first words spoken to me by Shri Bhagavan, and the last ones before I left for America. I had always loved to meditate upon those words, be still and know that I am God, but now they seemed to me to take on a new meaning and filled my heart with bliss. I had been at the ashram for 2 months, then made arrangements to sail 1 month later. I wanted to know more about India before going home, so I reluctantly made my plans to leave the place. I had grown to love it and was very sad during those last days. Bhagavan said, I will always be with you, wherever you go. When the last day arrived, I could not stop crying. Therefore I did not go to the hall, but sat by the pool. In the afternoon, when I sat before Bhagavan, he smiled and said, she has been crying all day. She does not want to leave me. He was so sweet and tender. Later I went to him for his blessing. The pain of parting was almost more than I could bear. With tears in my eyes, I knelt in deepest reverence and devotion before my beloved Master. May he always be my Father, Mother, and God, and may I always be his child, and whatever I do, may it be in his name. I then said goodbye to the devotees who had been so kind to me. As I drove to the station in the little cart, my heart grew heavy because I was leaving my Bhagavan. But I had so very much to be thankful for, having had the privilege of spending 2 months in his presence and been blessed beyond measure. Indeed, I was not the same person who had come to him 2 months earlier. When I reached Madras, I wanted to return to Bhagavan. I really did not want to tour India. Nevertheless, I went from Madras to Srinagar to Kashmir, then to Calcutta, where I expected to sail for America. I had a pleasant trip, stopped at many interesting places along the way, and was led to many people who were helpful and kind. What I would like to bring out is the way in which I was guided and protected. I had some blessed experiences, also 2 breathtaking ones on the train, and on one occasion I narrowly escaped death. It was the hottest season of the year, yet I felt no ill effects. A physician who was stopping at the same hotel in Agra said it was miraculous the way I traveled in the heat. He had seen strong Hindus drop like flies owing to the heat, which did not seem to bother me. I could hear Bhagavan's words, "I will always be with you, wherever you go." His dear face was always before me, no matter what I was doing. His presence filled all my heart. My eyes were filled with tears many times as I thought of returning to America without seeing him again. One day I seemed to hear him say, "Come back to me again." During the time I was separated from the Master, my love and faith had deepened, and I decided to return to him as soon as possible. I changed my plans. Instead of going back to America by the next boat, I took the train, leaving Calcutta for Tiruvannamalai. Queer to say, I felt as though I were going home. The tender way Bhagavan greeted me as I stood before him will live in my heart always. I wept with joy knowing I was thrice blessed in being able to return to him. As I bask in his eternal sunshine in those silent hours of communion, I was filled with his grace. It is a privilege to have some meals with the Master. To eat the food that he has handled is in itself a blessing. He would rise at dawn and help cut the vegetables, very often helping also to prepare special dishes that were delicious. The devotees prepared special food for me, and it was wholesome and good. Bhagavan was always considerate to everyone. He wanted to be sure there was plenty of everything, and the rich and poor received the same kind of attention as also the animals. No distinction was ever shown. One day I saw Bhagavan stoop down and pick up 3 grains of rice. That simple act taught me much more than I would have learned by studying 10 volumes on domestic economy, which is so essential in present-day life, but is so difficult to practice. Each day brought new lessons and blessings. He grew nearer and dearer to me as time passed, and my only wish was to be by his side. The monsoon was on, and the air was fresh and clean, and all the earth seemed radiant. Whenever it rained, Bhagavan's attendants put a white cloth on his chest to protect his body from the cold weather. He looked like a sweet child wearing a bib, and with all his wisdom and greatness one is struck by his childlike nature. At other times he looks like the King of Kings. His poise and dignity are outstanding. When sometimes at night he would throw a shawl over his head, he looked like the Madonna. I would stand outside in silent adoration. Again, at other times, he looked like a devoted father, smiling upon his children. I loved to watch him as he walked up on the hill, just when the sun was setting, and it was my greatest delight when I could go with him. One morning, I picked a lovely rose. My first thought was to give it to the Master. A devotee said, "What a beautiful rose." I replied, "Yes, it is for Bhagavan." I sat in the hall, wondering if I should give it to him. After a few minutes, I laid it on a small footstool near his sofa, and he said, "What is this?" I replied, "Only a rose." He said, "Give it to me." He took the rose and touched it to his forehead and cheeks. I was so deeply touched, I wept. I had the great privilege of being at the ashram in 1939 for Shri Bhagavan's birthday celebration, called the Jayanti Day, when, as on such occasions, thousands of people were fed. He is indeed a friend of the poor. A special leaf-covered shelter is erected for the occasion, so that many devotees who come for the celebration may sit in the presence of Bhagavan. One can never forget the Master as he sits there on his couch so majestically, amidst garlands of flowers, surrounded by his loving devotees, who are so happy to be with him at the same time. It is a day of rejoicing and thanksgiving for everyone, even the animals. As I walked along that night and looked at Arunachala so silent, I was held spellbound by the beautiful sight. The brightest star in the heavens shone directly above its peak, like a great beacon light to tell us, as it were, this is the Holy Land, the abode of Bhagavan, the Lord of the universe, whose greatness and spiritual power have drawn men from the remote parts of the earth, who come and kneel down and worship him, singing songs of adoration and praise to proclaim his glory. When I left America, I longed for peace. There was a yearning in my heart that would not let me rest. Here at the feet of the Lord of Love, peace and happiness garlanded me, and enriched my being. I know that Bhagavan led me to this haven of rest. In the words of Shri Bhagavan himself, so then, Shri Bhagavan will guide you at every step, for he has not guided you even before you knew you were really in search of him. I had been planning to leave the ashram for 5 months, but each time I thought I was going, something unforeseen presented itself. It was not his will that I should go. Bhagavan says, your plans are of no avail. I did not want to go, but I felt I should. My twin sister wrote several times and said there were things and matters which needed my attention, and she was very ill, although I did not know that at the time, but I somehow sensed it. That was probably the reason why I felt I should leave. As the time to leave drew near, I was very sad. I knew this time I would really go. It had been 8 months since I returned to the ashram for the second time. Those last days I spent with the master were blissful. He was so kind and tender, and when he smiled at me, tears would fill my eyes. I wondered how I could ever leave the place. When the day of parting came, I could not stop crying. In the morning, I walked on the hill with Bhagavan and some of the other devotees. Then again in the afternoon, when we had our picture taken with him. As I walked down the hill with him for the last time, he alone knew what was in my heart. I have tried in my humble way to tell about the wonderful experience I had when I was at Sri Ramana Ashram with the Enlightened One, but mere words can never express the peace and joy one feels in his presence. It must be experienced. There one truly has a glimpse of the eternal. As I am writing this article in 1946, 6 years after leaving the ashram, I would like to say that I have felt the Master's presence more and more with the passage of time. Just as he said he would, my devotion and faith have grown through the years and will never be shaken under any circumstances. I am very happy to say that I shall be returning soon to my beloved Master. I hear his call. Needless to say, this was the most blessed experience of my life. My stay at the feet of Bhagavan Shri Ramana Maharshi, the Lord of love and compassion. May I be worthy of the many blessings and the great love he has so graciously bestowed upon me. When she was back home in America, Nui used to write letters to Bhagavan. Whenever she wrote 4 letters, one addressed to Bhagavan, one to Nirajananda Swami, one to Bhagavan's attendant, and one to Ganesan, his nephew. Every time he read a letter from Miss Nui, Bhagavan would be moved to tears, as she would write in her letters, Bhagavan, I am writing this letter to you with tears rolling down my cheeks. In those days, Indians traveled very rarely to America, but whenever a devotee informed Bhagavan about such a trip, he would instruct them, go and meet Nui.